So, in D&D games, there's often a lot of city travel. Makes sense. You're in a fantasy land, you got to stop and sell your treasures and stuff everywhere. That you picked up everywhere, somewhere. So, a lot of different folks have different ways of handling cities. For me, I tend to handle them pretty simply. I really just go thematic. For me, a city is an NPC. A city is a character. It does a thing, and it does a thing well. Often specialties. This is kind of tropish, I know, but it's fantasy, and so I think it's expected, and it works well. It also simplifies, in a lot of cases, at least in my experience, how to handle the city. You're going to see a lot of recommendations, and there's nothing wrong with them, and certainly if it works well for you, go ahead and do it that way. For laying out your cities, picking name 5 inns, or make one signature inn, put a temple in there. This all works, and certainly, sorry, voices outside the garage. So it does work, but it's a lot of work. It is a great way to go, but it's a lot of work. And I find for the amount of time that my players, at least, spend in cities and what they do in cities, it's not really important for me to figure out too much up ahead of time. The other thing, too, is once you have the theme of your city set up, much of the things that you're going to add on or need to have later on are going to fall in place on their own. Example, the capital city of the vassalry of Aerolith, which is where my current campaign is taking place. The capital is Vassal City. Now, there's a few things that I've already decided about Vassal City. Vassal City is an old city. It goes back to the previous kingdom, the High Kingdom of Aerolith, where it was known as Highhold. So Highhold is now going by Vassal City. The High King is gone. Much of that political structure was wiped out, but Vassal City is still there. It's still the center of Aerolith. All the new infrastructure is seated there. The High Vassal is there. His agents are there. The Vassalmen, going back to Val Morgan from my campaign, the Vassalmen are excisemen, surveyors, basically agents who move around the land getting information. They don't really take an active role, but they're trying to piece together the land. Anyways, so Vassal City is big. It's got layers of history, and its most prominent feature is a center high point known as the Highhold, which is where the name of the city comes from. On the Highhold is the former High King's palace, as well as the palace complex, which was all the highest nobles, the biggest temples, and all the big uppity-ups. Now, there's a zigzag road back up and down, and a couple little side staircases and stuff, but it sits about 600 feet off the ground. It's huge, and it's just a big rock. So when I envisioned Vassal City, that was the core. It's the capital. It's in the middle of Aerolith. It's not near a river. It's not near a coast, which is also something that's interesting with the setting of Aerolith. Because of the former power of the High Kings of Aerolith, they centralized their power by forcing control over resources into cities that are away from the natural flow of resources. They controlled them by keeping them outside the normal transitional routes. So basically, Vassal City is in the middle of a plain on a big rock. Calith is in the middle of the fertile plains on a hill, but there are coastal cities, but they're not the centers of trade, or at least they weren't under the High Kingdom. Now, this points then to another feature of Vassal City. Vassal City is now living almost 100 years since the fall of the High King and the fall of the High Kingdom. That power is gone. That power is faded. The nobilities of that age were killed. They were destroyed by the Red King when he rose to power, who has also been defeated, his short reign. But that left a vacuum, a gap. So the vassalry is kind of a cooperative trying to hold together Aerolith, and they don't have the oomph. They don't have the totalitarian power to really hold that old form together. So these big cities in the middle of nowhere are starting to empty out. They're also starting to fall apart. So when the players first approached Vassal City, they noted that some of the walls were in disrepair. Not as bad as Calith, because it is still the capital, but they had been to Calith earlier. They noticed the high hold. There were city colors. But that is what they really had. Now, the other elements of Vassal City, those have been filled in by my players' needs and their characters' needs, backgrounds, and other role-playing elements. Most of this wasn't laid out up front, so I was able to fill it in based on my internal logic for what this place was, how old it was, and what made sense to be there. So when my brother was making his character Zev, who is a gnome wizard, he wanted to make his character kind of an academic style wizard, and he had invented, as part of his background, he came to me and asked me if there was anything. He kind of created the University of Highhold, which carries the old name of Vassal City, and it is the preeminent magic school academic center of the land. Makes sense. It's, that it would be in the center of the kingdom. So we got a new feature to Vassal City. At the same time, because we now had a university, that fills out some other stuff. You're going to have college pubs, bookstores, all of the academic infrastructure. So when the players visited Vassal City, one of the players in my party, or in my group, his character is a High Elf Ranger, Varathir. He asked if is there like an elven neighborhood or something I could go to? And I saw no reason why not. So we decided there was an elven quarter. Makes sense. While the elves aren't usually too populous in Aerolith, there are some prejudices against high elves, and the wood elves have just a small community. It made sense, though, that there would still be some commerce or elves that were kind of stuck away from home and that would live there, and they'd want to live in their own neighborhood, probably, because that allows them to be protected against some of the bad blood between them and humanity, which has faded to a degree, but still, there's always going to be those guys. So we have the Elven Quarter. And I took a cue from, American history, where we've got various, culturally specific neighborhoods that used to exist in older cities. And so Varathir goes to the Elven Quarter, and it's kind of like you step through the gates to the Elven Quarter, or there's an archway, and you're kind of in a little bit of Elendar, which is the High Elven realm. The architecture here is a blending of human architecture and elven filigree. The elves have put a large tree in the center of the quarter. Can't remember what they're called. But anyways, there's a big oak tree that they have there. Escapes me. Sorry about that. And so he does his business in the Elven Quarter. He's looking for specific wines. He's looking for weapons of elven crafting. He's looking for elven animals because he's looking to buy himself a trained bird. So we have some interactions with some merchants. The Elven Quarter, though, didn't exist until, at least as a hard detail, a fixed detail, until Varathir's player, until Moki had come up with the idea. He had asked the question. Just like University of Highhold didn't exist until my brother had tried to come up with the origin for his character. So this is kind of how I build my cities. That's Vassal City. Calith, for example, when they went to Calith is the religious seat of Old Aerolith, and remains so because, religion is something that tends to endure regardless, for the most part, unless you have a religion to replace it. Religion endures no matter who's in power. So the High Kings are gone. We have the Vassalry now, and the High Vassal. But in Calith, the churches are still there. There's still the Grand Temple of Ral. which is the preeminent structure in the city, and they could see it in the middle of the city. Calith is broken down. The walls have started to deteriorate. It's crowded. It's not running as efficiently. Vassal City, by contrast, was running quite efficient. There's a huge backup at the gates of Calith as pilgrims and stuff are there. They run into the Blood Shrouds, which are a weird sort of cult that reveres the Red King, not as like evil worshippers, but they see the Red King as an agent having been sent by Rawl to test and punish the Aerlith for having strayed, or because of the evil and the wickedness of the High Kings. So this is Calith. So Calith is a religious place. They didn't spend too much time in Calith, so we didn't get into too much detail on there, but I provided them with enough information to where they could see that Calith was a city that was once great, had fallen down. The religious structure in the center was still pretty pristine. It dominated the landscape. One thing I find is interesting, interesting way to establish a city as a character. Also, spend some time talking about who's on the streets. In Calith, the city guard were bored, and they were bumbling, they were barely attentive, and they were, kind of just leaning on their spears and, okay, move along, move along. Whereas in Vassal City, they were very efficient, they were watchful, the walls were manned, they had people moving through the crowds, keeping them going. They had separate entrances for carts and wagon traffic, as opposed to foot traffic. It was very efficient. A third city that they've been to in the campaign, though, and actually the first one that they went to, was Coulter's Cove. Now, Coulter's Cove ended up being sort of it was the first town they went to. I didn't want it to be too welcoming because I don't want them to stay there. They're only first level, so I want them to be able to get their stuff, get the information they need, but not want to stick around. I mean, Alwyn, the Wood Elf war cleric in the party, got mugged there because he didn't understand the city. So now Calith and Vassal City are typical of the old centralized dominating cities designed by the Old Kingdom to impose power on the people of Aerlith. Whereas Coulter's Cove is a coastal city, it's a trade city, it exists naturally based on a resource. So the seas off the coast, the west coast of Aerlith, are rich with fish and pods of whales and the like, and great sea beasts, and so Coulter's Cove is a whaling city, it's a fishing city, and it also does a good trade in the goods that it gets from the sea. That said, it's a different city. It's wooden structures and a lot of sparse stone structures. It's oily, it's dark, it's muddy. There's not a lot of paving. The further down the hill towards the water you go, the seedier it gets, the more working class it gets. The harbor is full of big boats, merchant vessels, and whaling vessels. There are columns of dark, thick, oily smoke rising from the south, where there's a lagoon that's blood red from where they slaughter the whales and they cut them up. It gives just a really dark, grim look to the city, and this is what the party saw as they're coming down the hill to it. So this already sets to them kind of a Mos Eisley kind of feel, wretched hive of scum and villainy. So when they get to Coulter's Cove, they find, they run into kind of this bombastic, fat, overfed, mayor. There's some seedy dealings going on with how he handles prisoners that they turn in. Later on, they find out, they're pretty sure that he is selling these bandits that they're turning in, selling them into basically press gangs to man the merchant vessels. But they also find good people there. So they find a very friendly banquet hall. The Fisherman's Fluke is what it's called, and this is actually where it's a place where it's like a seafood restaurant in fantasy style. Big banquet set, tables, all sorts of flair on the walls, nets and harpoons and preserved sea creatures, including their signature item, which is a full body preserved mermaid, supposedly and they get some information there. They run into some curious characters in this city. They when they're looking for information, they were looking for maps and local lore. So they tried the big office for the harbor master, and really got caught up in the bureaucracy. And then they met the master of charts, the chart master, who is actually the chart keeper is his official title, but he has elevated himself and thinks of it as a little bit greater than chart master. So he, this is cities. So this is how I handle cities. I don't spend a lot of time detailing them. It keeps them flexible so they can always suit a purpose. They build up over time, and there's flexibility by not setting a lot of things in stone. The cities for me end up being very living things. They can flex as I need them. They can have what they need them to. And so it's kind of one of those things where they still do their job, but they're not hard-coded. As a detail is decided, it gets jotted down. It becomes part of the collective storytelling that my players and I do. I don't like to spend a lot of time killing myself detailing out these cities where the players are really only there while they're bouncing around between dungeons and and the next big adventure. Now, if a city requires a little bit more detail because it's going to be a focus, then I do spend a little bit more time working on that. Like right now, I am working on some details for a city-state in my setting called Kamwar. Kamwar is the city of blades. It's a mercenary hive. It's the home of all the most renowned dueling schools in all of Aerolith. It sets itself apart from Aerolith since the fall of the High Kings. It's decided that it doesn't need the rest of the vassalry. It doesn't consider itself part of the vassalry. It is a city-state. It even has a self-proclaimed queen. And it is designed to be more of a self-contained environment that I was working on for another player of mine who we really haven't been able to do much playing, but he had a character who was going to kind of adventure in the city. So if a city needs to be more detailed, I will. But that's only if it's going to be really the focus for a lot of gaming. I don't spend a lot of time with players in cities for long periods of time. They go around to locations in cities. Recently, when they were in Vassal City, they went to the university. There were some things that were found out there. They went and they met at a house where Val Morgan's house. They met at a merchant shop. There were some encounters. They went to the Elven Quarter, but all these are spot locations. It's like when you're watching a movie. You may get the skyline of New York City, but are you really getting a lot of time spent in and out of New York? And regardless of how New York really works, the writers are going to write into New York what they need New York to do for them. The police are going to be just as corrupt or reliable as they need to be for the plot. The neighborhoods are going to be decided, kind of penciled in, but they're always going to be vague, and they're going to be just as honest or seedy as they need to be. They're usually kind of thematic, Little Italy or Chinatown, the Elven Quarter, the college town. These things can all be translated into D&D pretty easily. The Elven Quarter may as well be Chinatown. Everybody speaks a very distinct language. The foods are different, the smells are different, the attitude is going to be different for the most part. It's going to be very much a chunk of very distant land. Whereas if you go into modern day, cities, Little Italy or Irish Town or whatever you happen to have, I don't even know if those terms are really used anymore. They're not going to feel quite as distinct as, say, Little Saigon or Chinatown or the International District here in Seattle. Is not as distinct, say, as Chinatown in San Francisco, but it's still kind of different from the rest of the city. So, talked about theming your cities. You have a religious capital, you have a whaling city, you have the bureaucratic seat for the realm. I've got other ones. There's a mining town. There's, the mining heart. That works really well for creating a note, a good footnote for a location that you can build on as you go. You certainly can detail it as much as you need, but detail it as you need it. I find that works better. Detail it as you need it or as it comes up, rather than having reams of paper. In my experience, all that ends up doing is having you piling through your papers, trying to figure out a specific detail when it's just been sitting there in a stack of papers until you needed it. So why not just create it on the fly, jot it down, keep good notes, and then it builds itself, and it's never bigger than it needs to be, but it's always there. The players always know that Calith is a good place to go for churchy stuff. Coulter's Cove is a good place to go for whalers, merchants, smugglers. Vassal City is where you go when you need the central bank, when you need banking services, if you were going to need to lock up your goods while you go on a quest. Varathir's player now knows that there's a reliable elven quarter in Vassal City. There may be other elven quarters, but we haven't really got there. They know now from their experiences in Calith that there is an established caravan system that operates through Aerolith. It's a organized, armed caravan structure where you can pay money to have your wagon guarded by the caravan. Now, often there are freeloaders who kind of follow these caravans hoping to be protected, but you can join up with the caravans and you can pay your due and you can be included in the caravan. You're protected by their guards. You're actually given priority services for protection, and this can serve you well, and this can be a little trickier. I mean, it's 8 days from Calith to Vassal City. That's 8 days on a road, and so it's a pretty long trip. And you could walk it and be, bandit bait, or you could be in an armed caravan. So consider when you're making your cities for your games that detail is great, but detailing too much up front makes it a big pile of work that may or may not get used and may end up not fitting the needs of your game later on. You may feel, and now that may not be a big deal, you may be able to toss it out, but a lot of times if you create a lot of stuff and you don't get to use it, or things change, or it just doesn't fit, there can be a feeling of frustration in that you've done all of this, but you're not getting to use it, or you've painted yourself into a corner. Don't do that too often, because you're going to need to be able to flex. Your players are going to always surprise you. The campaign may not go where you wanted it to, and you may need to throw in something or pencil something in and it's a little harder to do that if you had it all figured out ahead of time. So anyways, that's my take on cities. They tend to be thematic sketches rather than detailed areas with a lot of fixed information up front. Give it a try, see how it flies for you, and keep on gaming. This is Eli with Elfbait. Have a good one.